You know you should be investing. You've known for a while, actually. Maybe you've read the articles, watched the videos, heard the compounding interest explanation enough times that you could recite it yourself. And yet you're not doing it. Or you're doing it less than you know you should, because something doesn't feel right yet. Maybe the market looks unstable. There's always something happening: inflation, interest rates, geopolitical tension, an election, a recession that may or may not be coming. Maybe you feel like you don't know enough yet. You want to understand it better before you put real money in. You're still figuring out the difference between an index fund and an ETF. You don't want to make a mistake. Maybe you're waiting until the debt is cleared, until the emergency fund is bigger, until the salary is higher, until life settles down a little. I'll start properly when I'm ready. That sentence, quiet, responsible sounding, completely reasonable, is one of the most expensive things you will ever say. Not because waiting is irrational, because the cost of waiting is invisible until it's too late to recover it. Today, we're going to make that cost visible. We're going to show exactly what waiting until I'm ready actually costs in numbers, in compounding, in the version of your future that quietly disappears every year you delay. The math that nobody actually sits with. Everyone has heard that compound interest is powerful. It's repeated so often it has stopped landing. So let's not talk about it abstractly. Let's run the actual numbers to people. Same income, same discipline. One difference: when they start. Person A starts investing at 25. They invest $500 a month. At 65, assuming a 7% average annual return, roughly the historical inflation-adjusted return of a broad market index, they have around $1.3 million. Person B waits. They have reasons, some of them genuinely good ones. They start at 35 instead. Same $500 a month. Same 7% return. Same discipline. At 65, Person B has around $600,000. Person A has more than twice as much. With the exact same monthly contribution. With the exact same investment choices. The only variable was 10 years. But here's the part that doesn't get said clearly enough. Person A contributed $60,000 more in total 10 years of $500 monthly contributions. Yet the difference in outcome is not $60,000. It's $700,000. The extra $700,000 didn't come from extra contributions. It came from time. From the compounding of returns on returns on returns. Over a decade that Person B simply didn't use. That decade, the one where Person B was getting ready, cost them $700,000. Not in money they spent, in money that was never created. That's the invisible cost. It never shows up as a line item. It never appears on a bank statement. It's just silently missing from the future. Why not yet feels so rational? The reason waiting feels responsible is that most of the reasons people give for waiting are not obviously wrong. They sound prudent. They sound like delayed gratification. They sound like someone who takes things seriously. Let's go through them honestly. I need to pay off my debt first. This one deserves nuance because it depends entirely on the interest rate of the debt. High-interest debt credit cards at 18 to 24% should almost always be paid off before investing aggressively. No investment reliably returns 20% annually. Paying off high-interest debt is a guaranteed return equal to the interest rate. But medium and low-interest debt, a student loan at 4%, a mortgage at 5%, a car loan at 6%. The historical average annual return of a diversified index fund is around 7 to 10% depending on the time period, which means there are scenarios where investing while carrying low-interest debt produces better long-term outcomes than paying off the debt first. This isn't an argument to ignore debt. It's an argument to stop using debt as a blanket reason to delay all investing indefinitely. The math is not as simple as debt first, investing second. And for many people, waiting until every obligation is cleared means never truly starting. I need to build my emergency fund first. This is the most reasonable version of waiting. Having no financial buffer while investing is genuinely risky. A job loss or unexpected expense could force you to sell investments at the worst possible time. But there's a version of this that stops being rational. The emergency fund that grows indefinitely because it never feels large enough. 3 months of expenses become 6, 6 becomes 12. And somehow, the emergency fund is always one crisis away from being adequate. So the investing keeps getting deferred. At some point, and that point is different for everyone, the emergency fund is sufficient. And additional cash savings are not protecting you. They're just sitting in a high-yield savings account earning 3% while the market compounds at 7%. The emergency fund is a floor. Know your floor. Once you're standing on it, stop building it and start building something else. I'm waiting for the market to settle down. This is the most seductive reason and the most empirically unsupported. Here's the problem. The market is always unsettled about something, always. Go back through any decade in market history and find a period that looks, in real time, like a safe.com, obvious moment to invest. You can't, because there is always a reason to be worried. There's always a narrative that says this moment is uniquely risky. In 2010, Europe was in a debt crisis. In 2012, fiscal cliff. In 2014, oil price collapse. In 2016, election uncertainty. In 2018, trade wars. In 2020, global pandemic. In 2022, inflation and rate hikes. In 2023, banking contagion fears. The person who waited for calm to invest is still waiting. The academic term for what you're doing when you try to find the right moment to invest is market timing. And the evidence on market timing is unambiguous. It doesn't work, even for professionals. Even for people with more information, more models, and more resources than any individual investor. Not because they're not smart, because the market is not predictable in the short term. And because being out of the market during its best days costs more than being in during its worst ones. I want to understand it better before I start. This one is interesting because it sounds like diligence. And genuine financial education has real value. But there's a version of this that is not really about learning. It's about avoiding the discomfort of committing. About keeping the option open to start when you're really ready. Here's the truth. You will never feel completely ready. The market will always have aspects you don't fully understand. There will always be more to learn. The question is whether you're learning in order to eventually act, or learning as a substitute for acting. For most people who say they're still learning, the answer, if they're honest, is the latter. The real reason people wait. It's not what they think. Behind all the rational-sounding explanations is something more fundamental. Investing is uncomfortable because it makes uncertainty real. When you invest, you're taking money that feels safe in your account, under your control, and moving it into something that can go down. Something you don't fully control. Something where you can watch the number decrease. So the waiting is, at its core, a way of avoiding that discomfort. And the reasons people give: the debt, the emergency fund, the market conditions, the education are real, but they're also often shields. They're ways of justifying the delay that feel rational rather than admitting that the actual reason is fear of uncertainty. This isn't a criticism. It's a deeply human response. The problem is that fear of uncertainty is costing you compounding. It's costing you time. And time, in investing, is the only resource you cannot recover. The asymmetry of regret. Here's a thought experiment. Imagine two versions of yourself at 60. Version 1. You started investing early. The market went through rough periods, it always does. There were years where your portfolio was down 20, 30%. You held. You kept contributing. By 60, your portfolio is substantial. Version 2, you waited. The timing was never quite right. You always had a reason. By 60, you have far less than you could have had. The money you kept in savings, or spent, or held back from the market didn't compound. It just sat. Now ask yourself, which version of you carries more regret? The research on end-of-life regret is consistent. People regret the things they didn't do far more than the things they did. They regret the risks they didn't take, the opportunities they didn't pursue, the decisions they deferred. The investor who started early and lived through market volatility rarely regrets starting. They regret specific decisions, maybe a concentrated bet that didn't work out, but not the act of participating. The person who waited until they were ready often regrets the waiting itself, the decade they didn't use, the compounding that never happened, the future that was smaller than it needed to be. The regret asymmetry is real, and it runs heavily against waiting. The perfectionism trap. There's a specific flavor of waiting that deserves its own examination. Waiting until you can do it perfectly. Waiting until you've found the optimal portfolio allocation. Waiting until you've read every book on index investing. Waiting until you've chosen the exact right brokerage. Waiting until you know with confidence that this is the right strategy. This is perfectionism dressed up as diligence. And it is extraordinarily expensive. Because the difference between a perfect investment strategy started in 5 years and a good enough investment strategy started today is enormous. And the difference between a perfect strategy and a good strategy over long time horizons is actually quite small. The research on this is clear. Asset allocation and investment selection matter. But they matter far less than most people think, especially compared to the contribution rate and the time horizon. Getting the allocation slightly wrong and starting now beats getting the allocation perfectly right and starting in 3 years. Every time, the math is not close. Perfect is the enemy of started. And started, in investing, is almost everything. What good enough actually looks like. So what does starting without being ready actually mean in practice? It does not mean investing money you don't have. It does not mean ignoring high-interest debt. It does not mean skipping an emergency fund entirely. It means accepting that your first investment will not be optimal, and doing it anyway. For most people in most situations, a good enough starting point is something like this. Enough emergency fund to cover 2 to 3 months of essential expenses. High-interest debt anything above 8 to 10% being actively paid down. Then, whatever is left over, invested in a low-cost, broadly diversified index fund, automatically, every month, not sophisticated, not optimized, not exciting, but started, compounding, working. The sophistication can come later. The optimization can come later. The reading and the learning can continue in parallel with the investing, but the investing needs to start, because the one thing that cannot come later is time. Every month that passes is a month of compounding that cannot be recovered. The automation insight. One practical observation that changes everything for a lot of people. The reason most people don't invest consistently is not that they lack the money. It's that they rely on willpower to make the transfer happen each month. They intend to invest. They plan to invest. But then the money is there, and there's something they need, or something they want, or just the friction of actually logging in and making the transfer. And it doesn't happen. Automation eliminates willpower from the equation. Set up an automatic transfer the day after your paycheck lands. A fixed amount to an investment account every single month, before you have a chance to spend it or decide you need it for something else. This one structural change, removing the decision from the equation, is responsible for more consistent investing than any amount of financial education or motivation. You don't need to feel ready. You don't need to be in the right mental state. The system runs regardless. And a system that runs imperfectly every month beats a plan that's executed perfectly someday, when you're ready. The thing about being ready. Here's the honest truth about readiness. Readiness is not a state you arrive at. It's not a threshold you cross after sufficient preparation. It's not a feeling that descends when the conditions are finally correct. Readiness is a story the brain tells to protect itself from the discomfort of commitment, from the vulnerability of putting real money into something uncertain, from the psychological weight of watching a number go down and having to sit with it. The people who invest successfully are not people who waited until they were ready. They're people who started before they were ready and built readiness through experience. You become comfortable with market volatility by living through it, not by reading about it. You build conviction in a strategy by watching it work over time, not by studying it in the abstract. You develop the discipline to hold during downturns by holding during downturns, not by waiting for a moment when holding feels easy. The readiness you're waiting for can only come from the experience of having started, which means waiting until you're ready is waiting for something that can only come from not waiting. Closing. The market will keep having problems. There will always be a reason the timing feels wrong. Your debt will take longer than expected to clear. Your emergency fund will never feel quite large enough. There will always be one more thing to learn before it feels safe to commit. And while you're waiting, the math runs. The compounding happens or doesn't. The time passes in one direction. Person A and Person B started with the same income, the same monthly contribution, the same investment choices. Person B was more cautious, more thoughtful, more careful about timing. Person B ended up with $700,000 less, not because they made a bad decision, because they made no decision, because they waited. The costliest financial mistake is rarely the one you made. It's the one you never made, the investment you never started, the compounding that never ran, the future that was smaller than it needed to be because the present never felt quite ready enough. You are not going to feel ready. That's not a problem to solve. That's the condition under which investing happens. The question is whether you'll invest anyway. Because the version of you at 60 is not waiting for you to feel ready. They're waiting for you to start. And they needed you to start a little earlier than feels comfortable. They needed you to start now.